Thank you, Acting Speaker. And I'm always happy to rise in this place to talk about housing because, as the member for Bulleen pointed out earlier, there are a lot of rental providers that have been taxed out of this state, and when you live in a tri-state area such as Mildura, you can physically see that happening every single day. And we know that there's a housing crisis in this state. We know that. You go out and talk to your communities and top of the list is healthcare, housing, roads, cost of living. Housing and cost of living, of course, are very closely related. Yes, rental stress is a huge issue, massive issue. Supply and demand. It's basic supply and demand, and when you make it so hard through reforms for rental providers to actually provide rent, of course there's going to be a lack of supply. There's a lot of talk, and we always see there's a lot of talk and shifting of blame about who's to blame for the housing crisis and who hasn't. You know, once it was, as the member for Bulleen said earlier, it was developers, then it was the coalition, then it was everybody except any accountability personally. And what could fix the housing crisis is incentivising those private rental providers to provide long-term rentals. But we've just making it so hard for rental providers. And no one is saying there shouldn't be a minimum standard of rentals. Of course, every dwelling on the planet should have a smoke alarm. There should be minimum standards for mould, and no one's saying that there shouldn't be. Of course there is. There is an issue, though, particularly in rural and regional Australia, and we see that now, and I'll illustrate a couple of points. One of which is that some rental providers, and there's a fair chunk of that market that is teachers, for example, nurses. Nurses, I think, are 9% of the rental provider market. Teachers are 10%. Mum and dad investors that might have one additional property are around the 35 to 40% mark. 71. So I was being conservative with my figures. So if that one additional property that is purchased with the view of providing a long-term rental, there are a lot of homes out there that are purchased that are perhaps ageing, that have been soldier settler houses, for example, that do need a lot of renovations to come up to minimum standards. If that is going to mean that there is a $50,000 to $100,000 renovation required to upgrade insulation or to upgrade an air conditioner and those types of things, or to upgrade your water system from a rainwater tank or whatever it might be, the expense is expensive. It gets more expensive the further away from a metropolitan area you get, and the ability to actually get tradies to do that work is, I mean, I've been trying to get a plumber now for 12 months and cannot get one. It's just, you just can't get, I've been trying to get a builder to do you just cannot. The member for Morwell, unfortunately, is no longer a plumber, otherwise that might be an easy fix. But we need to keep these, and maybe it is other reforms for regional and rural areas, because people do want to live out in the bush. Why wouldn't you? It's a wonderful lifestyle. You can get very large houses, and some of these houses are very large, but they are ageing. But pre-insulation, pipework might need to be redone, all that kind of stuff that no one's saying shouldn't be minimum standards. But it might be an ongoing thing. So to put someone under the pressure to spend $50,000 to $100,000 to renovate before actually listing that rental, while the property's sitting there, not being able to make a return on that investment, that's a poor investment. And when the rules are different, literally 100 metres away, where you can invest your money and get a return straight away, that's why we see developments, and that's why we see people literally jumping the river or jumping the South Australian border. And they do. I was talking to a real estate agent last week, and he was talking about, and has been a real estate agent in Mildura for 20 years. They, when I asked them at the start of last year, their reports were that they were losing 12 homes per week from their property list. Now it's around 10 per fortnight. So it hasn't really slowed up. They are still losing homes, particularly over the summer period. A lot of, I mean, we live in a tourist area, if you can handle the heat and like to water ski. A lot of these go to short stay accommodation. But the lack of incentive for the private sector to provide those long-term rentals has been taken away. They have been taxed out of the market in Victoria. It's as simple as that. It is not that hard to understand what would fix this. Unfortunately, because of those 58 new or increased taxes, half of which are property related, is it any wonder they are leaving the state and literally going across the river or across the South Australian border? And even this real estate agent that I was talking to has ceased investing in property himself in Victoria. He's now going to Victor Harbour because it's easy. Even if they want to build new apartments in Victor Harbour, it's much easier and it is much, much quicker. It's much quicker. So as we might say, no, again, no one's saying that renters obviously need to be looked after. There needs to be minimum standards, but not to the detriment of those that provide those rentals in the first place, because that's just madness. And guess what? It leads to a housing crisis. And that's what we're seeing. So instead of some practical solutions, and you know I'm a pragmatist by now, I like practical solutions that will actually have tangible outcomes so that we haven't got people who cannot get a rental property for months and months and months, and only then they may have to go and live in someone's second dwelling. And this is another issue in rural areas, is that the planning schemes don't allow to excise old block houses because small farmers that could once make a living off a 30-acre irrigated horticulture block can no longer. Again, farming's got really hard too. So for those small-time farmers, they're being bought out by the bigger guys next door. Unfortunately, even if they've lived in their house all their life, they cannot excise that dwelling on a 30-acre block from that land and stay in their home. So they're going to buy other rentals or go buy another property, not to provide long-term rental, like they all move into one that they've had for 20 years. When that was a long-term rental, they are having to give a notice to vacate because they need that place to live. So there are planning reform levers that could be pulled to alleviate and offer some practical support to the housing crisis. You just cannot tax your way. You can't tax your way out of debt, and you can't tax your way out of a housing crisis. It just makes it worse. So we need practical solutions to this housing crisis, of course. I was listening to the member for Ovens Valley too, who gave a very, very comprehensive bill report. But of course, he seeks, and I support his reasoned amendment, that all the words after that be omitted and replaced with the words, "This House refuse to read this bill a second time until the government withdraws the bill and consults further with rental providers and industry about the unfair impact of the removal of no-fault evictions." And again, it may not be the fault of those renting. It may be the fault of other rules and other flow-on effects of this government implementing so-called reforms that have led to this housing crisis, or have led to people not being able to live in a home that they've lived in for 50 years. And I know that this is something that is quite specific to rural and regional Australia, but guess what? We matter too, and we also need somewhere to live. And someone that's worked the land for the past 50 years to provide food and fibre to the people of this state, this country and internationally, should have the right to choose to stay in their home if they want to. It is not that hard, Acting Speaker. It's really not. It's pretty simple, actually. So a couple of reforms that we know, whether they don't fit the city even, they certainly don't work in regional and rural Victoria. And when we are sitting on the border of New South Wales and South Australia, and we can see land being cleared for more housing developments and sold signs going up quite literally daily, whether it's for investment properties or for housing, that They live in New South Wales, but they're still using Victorian hospitals, schools, police, ambulance a lot of the time. It doesn't make any sense.
I call the member